challenges in the child services field, and I'm just going to call them in the order in which they were given to me. And then I know, Will, are you planning to testify, or someone else from DOE? Oh,
I'll make it easy.
okay, wonderful. That's great. You don't mind going after these folks, do you? Okay. All right. Well, why don't we start with Rachel Fisher from Lutherwood. And I think for the committee members, these mics doesn't look like they go off. So I'm just going to push my mic away from me so you don't hear me during the testimony. But Ms. Fisher, if you want to go ahead and testify, then I think what we'll do, we should be okay to do some questions and conversation with each person who testifies, and then we can come back at the end after everybody's had an opportunity and have some more committee discussion and any questions that come up as other people testify. How does that sound? Good? Okay. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Rachel Fisher. I'm the Executive Director for Community Health Network. I have my MBA in Healthcare Administration, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I've spent 20 years serving children and their families in child welfare. Community Health Network and Lutheran Child and Family Services have a management service agreement where Community Health Network manages the daily operations for LCFS. We're licensed by the Department of Child Services for 112 beds, where we offer secure residential treatment for youth 6 to 21. We have a unit for survivors of human trafficking. We also have 2 emergency shelter programs for youth 18 to 18 years of age and a group home for males 14 to 21. We recently opened a new program, which is a 30-unit apartment building for former DCS foster care youth who are now homeless between the ages of 18 and 24. Since the start of COVID-19 crisis, our environment has been drastically impacted. We were not equipped to handle a public health pandemic, which then led into a workforce crisis. Throughout my career, the last year and a half have by far been the most challenging and difficult years. Every decision I make directly impacts a life. We serve a vulnerable population that has a significant history of trauma. My decision-making directly impacts a child, their family, or my staff. I've had to make hard decisions throughout my career, but now it's different. When I say no, there are limited, if any, options. My difficult decisions, again, make a lasting impact. Most recently, I made the decision to close our emergency shelter, a shelter that's relied on heavily by Marion County DCS and probation. The decision led to kids sleeping in the DCS office or being driven miles away from their support system, a system that relies on our program when a youth is recovered from human trafficking or a domestic dispute occurs at home, now is closed due to workforce. You may ask, why did we close this over other programs? On average, a youth resides with us in our secure program 6 to 9 months, so we can't just close the program or one of our units. We also did formally close a unit, normally at 6 units and down to 4 at this time. We must at a minimum give DCS a 30-day notice, and then we must hope that we find an alternative. Closing emergency shelter was simply the quickest decision I could make. On typical average daily census is 84 youth. Today, I'm at 45, which is a 53% reduction in care. I have over 50 positions open that include our youth support specialist. Those are our frontline staff, non-degreed with our kids 24/7. Our life skills clinicians are bachelor's degreed who provide essential individual and group activities, as well as support services such as cooks. We must provide all of our youth's needs, and at a minimum, we need to have candidates, which are barely coming in. We've had to start looking at how to meet the basic regulatory requirements, such as cold breakfast on the weekends, instead of cooking hot meals every day for our kids, which is difficult decisions to make. Through September 2021, we've received 371 referrals from 57 counties. Youth referred are waiting for treatment. While I have beds, I simply do not have the staff. I also want us to remember the more complex cases that DCS refers and then follows up with calls acknowledging the need for a one-to-one, in some cases begging and willing to look at any option for us to admit the youth. While we're struggling with staffing, we simply cannot consider the youth that is more complex due to the severity of that and safety risks that ensue. My most recent call required the youth to sleep in the DCS office with family case managers as they look for programs with bed available, as well as staffing to meet that and programming to meet that kid's need. This youth was discharged from an acute hospital to the DCS office. How are we as a state okay with this? These calls are difficult. It's difficult to say no to youth in need and to know that my no has a long-term impact. The workforce challenge is not unique to rural areas. We are in central Indiana and part of a large healthcare system, yet we're in the middle of a crisis. I've experienced a reduction in staffing by approximately 25% throughout this year. Prior to COVID, we were working with Ascend Indiana to develop a talent pipeline, even selecting an educational partner. As we revisited this project, we determined our staffing was too acute to proceed. Instead, we asked them to focus on recruitment with us. We're working collaboratively with Workforce One and Goodwill. We have added billboards on the east side of towns and advertisements on buses, anything to get our position out in front of the public. Financially, this is very difficult to sustain. We have increased wages for our frontline staff to $15.50 and are right now asking for another market review. Our current staff have received a 6% increase this year, as well as market reviews. We're also offering retention and recruitment bonuses. Our current recruitment bonus was increased from $350 to $1,000. We're offering $3,000 in retention bonuses paid out in increments over a year. To help ensure staffing and stabilization of campus, we're offering premium pay between $16 to $20 per hour. We're assuming 100% of this cost, and it cannot be sustained. And some of this is because we're part of a large healthcare system. Our staff and leadership team are exhausted and burned out. I'm leading on a hope and a prayer that every day staff show up and we do not have serious safety events. A hope and a prayer are not sound business decisions, and it's not how a leader should be forced to lead. We can't compete with 9-to-5 jobs such as Amazon or Taco Bell. Recently, my program manager of 8 years resigned, with last Friday being her last day. She had to make the difficult decision to not allow her career to interfere with her family. Her passion is residential and the youth we serve, yet she took a demotion that will allow her to be at home on nights and weekends. Our personal sacrifices have a price tag, one that is exceeding what anyone has to offer. Working in child welfare is a calling and requires someone who's passionate about the work and willing to engage in the helping process. We're asking the state to assist us. The state must implement universal background checks. If a system cannot be developed, then we must be allowed to onboard and train staff as we wait for their background checks to clear. They do not have to work with our youth for us to train them. Is this a risk? Yes, but we lose candidates who cannot wait for a paycheck during this process. If they have lived in multiple states, it takes weeks to months to get these results. We're willing to pay that fee just so we can have staff coming down our pipeline. The state should also implement an operating margin. I cannot raise my price as other industries can. A recent article stated, if you haven't received a 5.4% increase this year, you've not received an increase. Inflation is real and we are all facing it. Labor and supply shortages impact us as well. I often say I'm competing with Taco Bell or Amazon. Yeah, I'm treating Indiana's most vulnerable asset, the children. As my cost of doing business has increased, I have not received any financial support from the state to offset the cost of care. Should I, as the provider, be responsible for $1 million plus loss this year, or should it be shared with the state? After all, I'm providing care to Indiana's children who they may be guardian of, yet it's my responsibility to figure out. I should not have to wait 2 years to realize the cost of business. The cost for me is now, not in 2 years. Today, I'm paying staff close to $40 an hour for a $15.50 role. This is not sustainable, and I should have a way to adjust expenses and revenue. It also places collaborative partnerships such as Community Health Network and LCFS at risk. We are asking Indiana and our partners to stand by us and support us during this time. We need to develop a healthy workforce that are trained and equipped to serve our youth. I could not be prouder of my team and the work they do. We have continued to successfully treat youth and their families, serving our mission and vision. Every day we get up and fight for what we believe in and work to ensure their needs are met. Indiana's youth and their family are depending on you. We need treatment and options that work. So please stand by us and be a part of the solution. Thank you.
Thank you. Should have mentioned this before you started, but if folks have written testimony or if you can leave your testimony or email it to my LA, I know I'd like to have a copy of it, and I'm sure others would as well. You packed a lot in there. Thank you. Any questions from the committee members? I know I have a couple. Don't be shy, guys. Please.
What do you see as the driver? You said you need more state support. In what capacity?
I think looking at regulatory legislative changes such as background checks, looking at our cost operating margin. Right now, our cost report is based off of 2 years in the past, whereas these costs through 2020 is when COVID hit. I'm paid right now off of 2019. So we've now been a year and a half plus off of costs that we're not even realizing with the way we're reimbursed. So looking at a business model that really works from the state so that we're ensuring that we have a healthy workforce program, staff development, those types of things.
Do you know if is that a Medicaid issue or is it a state policy issue? I mean, is it a federal issue versus a state issue?
It's some of it's Indiana legislative code. Mhm.
And what do you think of the main drivers to the staffing problems? Is it pay or is it the work-life balance that you mentioned earlier?
I think it's a multitude. I think one, we now compete with, like I said, Taco Bell, Amazon, you show up and it's the same pay rate. Our youth are challenging. Our staff get physically assaulted, they get cussed out, and then vicarious trauma is real. When you talk about the kids and taking on their story, you have to want to be a part of that helping process. And it's easier for staff to choose and say, okay, I'm going back to Amazon or I'm going to Target versus do it because of the stress that it puts on our staff. I think recently we don't even hardly have candidates coming in. So we're trying to figure out through all of our different marketing campaigns, where is the workforce that's active and ready to go? And then how do you invest in them so that they are educated and able to actively be a part of our kids and their treatment journey?
Please.
Thank you so much for your testimony.
Thank you.
Can you say a little bit more about the universal background checks and what that would do to help with keeping people on?
So I think, and you have multiple providers in this room, we have staff that work at different agencies. They might work with me part-time, with another one full-time. We all have to compete and complete the same exact checks. So having a system where we can go in, look at those background checks, know they're cleared for myself at Lutherwood and they could go and work at Resource or options here in town, that we're not all doing the exact same documentation. We do annual background checks, fingerprints every 4 years on our staff after hire. The process is very rigorous to work with our kids. And it seems like we should build out a system within the state where when those checks are completed, we can continue to have them work in multiple agencies at once or not have to wait if they've just left another facility, potentially, let's say they lived out of town or out of state. You might be waiting a few months when they've just came from another facility.
Thank you.
Has that been considered? Universal background
I'm
checks?
going to lean on Don Travis. He's our background check expert. We talked a lot.
Who's
about
that? I'm
this.
sorry.
Don Travis.
Oh, hi, Mr. Travis. Do you want to hop up to the mic there and give us a little background on backgrounds? Yeah.
The one thing I think we need to differentiate here is what background check is. According to the statute, there's 4 actual checks.
Mhm.
And when we talk about out-of-state things, we are actually talking about a CPI, Child Protective Index, CPS check. The fingerprint check is actually a national state police and FBI fingerprint check. So we're not waiting on those.
Mhm.
What we're really waiting on is the CPI, CPS checks. And during COVID, various states have done various things to address those. There is an opportunity for us to look into this a little bit farther to see if we can expedite that. We did have conversations with IARC in the past. We're really looking into whether we can do some things internally to help expedite those processes.
Is there legislation needed for that?
No, this would be something internal. When she talks about universal checks and she mentioned going through different things as far as having what was indicated as some sort of repository that she could go into and check. The DCS is actually guided by a number of different things, state statute, federal statute, and regulations by the FBI. So the FBI regulations actually indicate that they're under very strict circumstances. You can use a background check more than once, but they said it's highly irregular. And the background checks or what the FBI is indicating is that once it's done, it's time and date stamped because somebody may get arrested an hour from now, 2 hours from now, and then that record is no longer good.
Sure.
There are some states that have what they call wrap back, which allows for once you put a name into the system, the reporting agency gets a report back anytime there's a subsequent arrest. And certainly we're looking into what that means. We've been offered some examples of Illinois and Florida. We're examining those statutes to see what we can do across or make recommendations to the legislature on that.
Would that require legislation?
Yeah, I would believe so.
The legislature meets in 2 months.
Understand.
So we need to talk about that. So let me give you an example. I think let's say, and Ms. Fisher, correct me if this is a bad example, but you have an employee who comes from another facility where they've undergone a background check, then you're saying that they would have to have a new background check because of the FBI requirement, right? But let's say that they had just had a background check to start employment at the other facility 6 months earlier, and now they want to go work for her. We'd have the delay of getting a new background check. But if they had continued working where they'd already been checked out, there wouldn't be any requirement to update that on the same timeline, right?
Yeah, I was gonna say, correct. We have a policy that if staff are arrested, they're supposed to notify us within 24 hours. And then from there, we would go through the process of running, seeing what that arrest was. However, if they did not disclose it, we would not know until we came up on those annual or every 4-year checks.
And what he just described that some other states are doing with the automatic updating
Yeah.
would solve that problem, right?
Absolutely. You could
Okay.
run employees' names through a system, let's just say monthly, like you do for student loans, to ensure they're in compliance. And
Right. Well, it sounds like maybe it's happening automatically in the background in those states and you don't even have to run it actively. Is that what I'm hearing?
yes, we would.
Talking to the mic, if you would, please.
I'm sorry, we will
That's
have to
okay.
look at the underlying statutes that go along with that. So like I said, we're examining those things right
Okay.
now.
Well, let's examine quickly because the legislature meets in 2 months. So seriously, I mean, if there's something we can do to address any of the concerns that are raised here today, I would love to collaborate with you, Director Stignan, and your whole team, to try to figure out solutions. Did I understand, Ms. Fisher, did you say your capacity has gone down from 84 to 45?
Yes. So right now, today, we're taking care of 45 kids, and even during kind of the height of COVID, we were more in the 80s. So
Okay.
we continually are closing programs, putting bed holds on, because we have to ensure safety.
But you have demand for more than 45 beds.
That's why I
It's
said,
just
yeah.
that you can't staff more than 45 beds.
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
And any other questions from members of the committee, please?
A follow-up on background checks, I just wanted to come back to it with regarded hiring. And believe that is regular statute that requires that you wait to hire a person at all, whether they're in front of kids or not. That you have to wait until you have completed all the background checks. How is that impacting your ability in this market to hire people?
We lose them. Simply, they can't wait. If someone has decided to work in this market, they cannot wait for months to come to work for us for a paycheck. So when we say, we try to do cohort onboarding. Today's the first of the month. We try to do it that way. And we say, we don't have them back. You're going to have to look at December. They're gone. They're not going to wait. Whereas we have a 3-week onboarding period. They're not even with the children during that time. So that's something that it was legislatively changed, where allowing agencies to onboard and train staff, there is a risk. But at the same time, if everything comes back and checks out okay, and we can complete most of the checks, but there is a risk, but we can still train. And like I said, we're willing to do that because we need anyone who's capable of working with the kids and willing to invest. It's really a fee that we're investing to train them until everything is cleared.
But the bottom line is folks are going to go where they can get a paycheck.
They're going to go where they can get a paycheck, and they're not going to wait on us for weeks to months,
Right.
especially if they've lived out of state in the last 5 years.
Okay. Any other questions? I want to get into the operating margin issue more, but I have a feeling some of your colleagues are going to touch on that as well. So we may ask you to come back up and answer some more questions later, but thank you again. Let's have Julie Jackson from, is it Campania? Pronouncing that correctly? All right, Ms. Jackson, thank you for joining us this morning.
Okay. Good morning. Thank you so much for your time today. My name is Julie Jackson, and I'm the CFO at Campania Academy in Cherville, Indiana. We are a residential facility in Region 1, and we're the only QRTP facility that has a PRTF private secure IDD intellectual and developmental disabilities program, as well as other residential and community-based programs. So we are the only one in Region 1. I'm going to focus a little bit on staffing and financial issues today, but I can't stress enough that I echo exactly what Rachel said. She kind of really encompassed everything that we're all thinking today, but I'm going to kind of focus on staffing and financial. So we've been struggling with staffing levels for well over a year now, and this has affected our ability to accept new admissions, and which leaves children on wait lists. And just like Rachel was saying, we have wait lists in every single program, and we could bring them in if we had the staffing to care for them. So our staffing shortage has affected direct care positions most of all, but we are also struggling to hire in other areas on campus. These positions are generally lower paid positions. And so not only are we competing with congregate care facilities and youth service organizations, we're competing with fast food and other retail facilities, just for any qualified staff. So I would say we've been operating at approximately half capacity for all through the summer, even as far back as the spring and into the fall. We've been operating at half capacity. So we too have bed space for approximately 100 children, and we're at about half with wait lists on all programs. So, we also have been working collaboratively with Workforce One. We've attended every job fair. We're advertising and utilizing social media way more than we ever have to try to address this issue. And there's just a shortage of staff, especially at what we're able to offer pay-wise. Things that we've done in the past, during 2021, we increased our direct care staff by over 18%. So the hourly rate went up over 18% in 2021. And to be honest with you, we would really need to increase it another 18% in order to really be competitive in the marketplace. So, and that would really just put us even on par with other employers. So in addition to dramatically increasing direct care staff, we're also offering retention bonuses and signing bonuses, which is also, increasing our staff and payroll expense. And we're also trying to do things like staff appreciation. So all of these things have a dollar cost to them, but we're trying to improve our staff appreciation efforts because, whether it's gourmet cupcakes or food trucks or employee of the month gifts, we're trying to keep people engaged and remind them how much we appreciate them, because we're seeing, just like Rachel said, we're seeing burnout. We're seeing burnout at an enormous level. And, the burnout is an issue for the employees, and it's just a morale issue for organization wide. Overtime is higher than we want it to be, which is not only a financial concern, but it's an employee care concern. And, we don't want people working a lot of overtime because it's an employee care issue. I would say at this, basically at this moment in time, and pretty much for the past at least 6 to 9 months, we have been 30 to 40% understaffed. So whether it's a supervisor filling in or whether it's other, departments filling in direct care, everybody is chipping in, whether it's nights, weekends. And like I said, we're seeing huge amounts of overtime, which concerns us. These initiatives, all of these things that we've talked about, they're very costly. I mentioned the 18%. That increase that we implemented earlier this year cost us $300,000, and that's annualized $300,000. So if we implemented the other 18%, which we really need, we're talking double that, $600,000. And I know Rachel talked about it a little bit. We're an agency that's reimbursed by DCS through a cost report. And so what that means is, unfortunately, those costs that we are incurring today will not be a part of our per diem rate until 2023. So the cost of living adjustment. So what goes along with that, obviously costs are pulled into the per diem rate from 2 years prior. And then there's a cost of living adjustment. So, that obviously does help, but a cost of living adjustment is not enough to cover extraordinary expenses like this. And agencies like ours are bearing the burden of the costs that we're incurring today for the next 2 years, essentially. So the other thing that I think I would like to talk about, because I think everybody kind of wraps this all around COVID, that it's so COVID specific, and our staffing concerns are COVID specific, but the cost report process, although it calculates a per diem, it calculates a per diem based on the assumption that your program is going to stay the same and that you're just going to experience inflationary increases. And when we're looking at such dramatic changes like this, it's not just a cost of living, it's not just an inflationary increase. So, structurally, I think that's what we're struggling with, and we're trying to figure out how do we adapt and change with all of these things that are going on, when really what it's looking at and what we're being paid for is program operations from 2019, right? Pre-pandemic, before all of this started. So again, structural programmatic changes and increases have been far in excess of any cost of living adjustment, inflationary 2, 3, 4% adjustment. And so the financial burden really falls to the agencies. So I guess that's why I know there's been a lot of discussion about the operating margin, and for-profit agencies that essentially do what we do have an operating margin provided as a matter of law. And even though they're doing the same thing that we are, right? So as we look at some of these extraordinary expenses and just trying to adapt and change to all of these changes, we look at these for-profit agencies that are essentially doing what we're doing, but they get the benefit of an operating margin to help them to adapt and change. And so I think that's what all of the not-for-profit agencies look to as a matter of parity, is the notion of an operating margin to be provided to not-for-profits as well. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. So what is the COLA adjustment based on?
It's really a cost of living adjustment that has, and maybe Director Stigdon can help with this.
And I would pitch to Aaron.
Okay.
We're playing ball here.
Aaron Atwell, CFO for DCS. So the COLA is based upon the CPI as well as the employment index, and it's roughly about 4.5%.
Okay, 4.5%.
So in typical years where you have, let's look over the past 20 years, right? Inflation's been really low. An agency like ours, as we're doing our budget and we see things like healthcare is going to go up 27%, maybe utilities are going to go up 7 or 8%. We are able to balance that 3 or 4 or 4.5% across the board to make it work. We're experiencing dramatic cost increases everywhere. We can't offset one to the other. Makes sense.
Well, talk about it in the context of your overtime cost. I mean, your overtime is time and a half, right?
Right.
So obviously, that's a 50% surcharge on labor.
That too.
So 4.5% is not 50%. So can you put that in context?
Certainly. So, we understand that there's going to be overtime, and overtime has increased significantly over the past year or two, which obviously speaks to, payroll and payroll related expenses. But I think where we're really seeing significant changes structurally to our budget is really trying to get direct care staff to have a salary that is, or a wage that is competitive to any other employer, to be able to draw them to us.
Right.
And if we're, like I said, we implemented an 18% increase and we really need another 18 to be competitive.
And CPI only indirectly reflects labor cost, correct? So do you want to come back up and talk about that? It's a CPI is based on a basket of goods and services, right?
Believe so. Yeah. Not a CPI expert, but yes, believe so.
Yeah. Introduce yourself again, please.
Aaron Atwell, CFO, DCS.
I'm sorry, what's your last name?
Atwell, ATW.
Atwell.
Yep.
Thank you. So how would you reconcile the CPI versus labor cost issue? And I'll put you on the spot in the current, not a solution per se, but I mean, obviously, if CPI is the basis for the COLA that these providers receive, and CPI, the most recent COLA is based on 4.5% CPI. Again, if that indirectly accounts for labor costs, it's not directly accounting for the labor costs we just heard.
Sure. I don't have a perfect answer for you. So I think it would take some time and some research and to see kind of what other states and others are doing as well.
Okay.
So a little bit back. So the COLA, all for-profits as well as nonprofits get the COLA. And then the for-profits also get an operating margin that is on top of that COLA as well. So everybody would get that 4.5%, but then the operating margins, about 7% would be for-profits. So that's a little bit of the history on it. But again, I don't have the perfect answer. I just think it would take some research.
Right. So the for-profits would have that additional 7% cushion.
Correct.
That is not there for the nonprofits.
That is
like
correct.
Ms. Jackson's agency.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Correct. Thank you.
We'll probably need you again. I'm glad you're here. Any questions for Ms. Jackson? Please.
A couple. So why is there a difference between a for-profit and not-for-profit pay structure? Why do you not have the profit margin, but the for-profits do? Is that an internal policy or is that law?
I'm not,
Okay.
yeah, I mean, I would take it. If it were up to me, I would take it.
Yeah.
Aaron Atwell, CFO, DCS. I might just stand up here. So that's an administrative code, Mike. And I'm not exactly, the history behind it, we could talk about, but it's specifically spelled out in the administrative code on who gets the for-profit, or who gets the profit margin versus who does not.
And I think we are going to get into that, aren't we? Is that in your presentation? Not too much.
Update.
Okay. Well, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So the 2-year look back for reimbursement, is that apply both to profits and nonprofits as well?
State that again. Sorry. Michael.
The 2-year look back, so the reimbursement is based on a 2-year look back. So they're billing at 2019 numbers. Is that the same for profits? Do they also get reimbursement 2-year look back?
Yes, the cost reporting for both operating or for the for-profits and nonprofits is a 2-year. It's a rate that's set based upon previous 2 years expense.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
There's a whole other sector of providers that provide like the in-home chins
Yep.
or the other work, and they're paid on a flat fee
Correct.
basis where they just take whoever they get. They have like a set amount that they can renegotiate fairly often, I think, from one of that.
Yep.
Could that model not work with the residential facilities as well? Does that make sense?
No, I think it would, but I think it's also trying to be responsive to increase cost, whether the model is perfect or not. I think a set rate, I think throw some flags up and some problems, but definitely, I mean, it's something we can look at, and the director and I've been talking about, different ways of looking at things. But again, I think it's being responsive to true cost.
So the operating margin issue is in administrative code, you said?
Correct.
Okay.
The administrative code calls out profit margin and who gets it.
Okay.
Well, that's just rulemaking then. Could that DCS just engage in rulemaking to change that? The current statute?
Potentially. Rulemaking can be a lengthy process. Right?
That's generous.
Generous. Yeah, and obviously emergency rulemaking is available under certain circumstances. I'm really interested in digging deeper into this issue, and I don't want to put you on the spot. Do we have anybody from state budget here?
No.
Okay. So we may not be able to fully unpack the history, how we got from point A to point B, but we are where we are. And I've become increasingly aware that it's a big part of the crisis that we're hearing about today. So again, don't go too far from the mic. I have a feeling you'll be back. Thank you. Any other questions for Ms. Jackson? Okay, thank you. And we may have some more questions for you later. Next is Rob Sturm from Jabalt.
Hello, my name is Rob Sturm. I work with Gibraltar Children's Services, Terre Haute, Indiana. I have worked in child welfare for 24 years. Our facility is currently licensed to serve 126 youth. We are currently serving about 85 due to staff shortage. Currently with 3 units closed, looking possibly at closing more. Workforce crisis is now. It's not 2 years from now. I mean, it's now. So pre-pandemic, we were working full staff, 225 staff. We actually were working at about 215 pre-pandemic. We are currently 50 direct care staff short. Resignations come at a higher rate than do the hirings. Hiring is an issue, one, with the onboarding process being so long, but two, I'll be honest, we just have problems getting anyone to even apply for the jobs anymore. Years ago, we could hire, again, we hire in cohort groups also about 1 time a month. Years ago, we were hiring 30 staff at a time. We are looking at 1 and 2 now. We sometimes have weeks where we lose 8 staff and hire 0. So that is the direction we are heading. This is creating many hardships, overtime, lots of overtime for the staff that are working, as we have the youth aren't here there short periods of time. So sometimes when we have a mass resignation over a week, we may have to go into mandatory overtime. We are currently working at a mandatory overtime of a minimum of 50 hours a week, causing staff burnout, causing a lot of people to have different attitudes than they had prior. We have many agency challenges. Other businesses are paying at a higher rate for what I consider a much less intense level of work. Many of those businesses have closing times. They're closed on holidays, not open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. At McDonald's, if someone doesn't show up, you can close the lobby. We are unable to do that. We are currently paying our staff at what is the new minimum wage, $15 an hour. And the question is, do we want minimum wage staff serving the kids, or do we want staff of higher quality? I have staff that are leaving on a regular basis for Menards, where they can walk in and they tell me, if someone doesn't show up, I still get to go home at 10. That is one of the big issues. Remember, one of the things to remember is we're working on a fixed income controlled by cost reports with rates based off of 2 years ago. As I said, the problem is now, and we need a way to address that problem now. We have other issues in Terre Haute, Indiana that cause us problems that are out of the hands of anyone here. Indiana State University, one of our major hiring sources, has went from 13,500 students to 9,500. That is a major hiring source for us. We have a major drug problem. So many of the people that are in Terre Haute aren't eligible to work for us. We understand that, nor do we want those people working for us at the moment. But hiring in this field takes much longer than any other business. Some steps that we have taken, we have raised pay by about 18% also. We probably need another 20 to 25% to get staff to even apply for the jobs. We are doing sign-on bonuses, retention bonuses. We do referral bonuses for staff that get people signed on. We even do a attendance bonus for the direct care staff if they just show up to work most of the time. It isn't even a thing that we're on a quarterly basis. They're allowed to miss a shift and a half and still get the retention or the attendance bonus. We've done many different recognitions, different things for staff, and none of them really seem to make much of a difference. We have actually went into some different things. Impact on our workforce shortage. We're doing less training. Our staff are not nearly as well trained or as they used to be. We're doing less meetings. We're doing less quality assurance. We're serving fewer worth and unable to help DCS in the manner that we used to. Many times I would receive phone calls from different levels of DCS asking, can you make an accommodation? Can you get this kid in today? Can you do this? The answer used to be, we will figure it out. We are here on the same team. The answer now is, I'm sorry. I hope the hotel bill can be paid for a long period of time. We have no openings, although we have 40 open beds. It is all due to staff. Quality of care and relationships are not consistent with patching shifts instead of providing consistent staffing. Anybody that knows anything about childcare, relationships are the most important part of the business. Impact on the cost reports will be detrimental for many years to come, as we have salaried staff who normally do other jobs filling the jobs of direct care staffs. This will give a very false appearance on the cost reports in the future, making it look as if we can do the job for cheaper. What can we get from help is to understand this is an immediate problem. Waiting 2 years on cost reports is not going to solve a crisis. Restaurants and grocery stores, they can change their prices based off supply and demand. If they need to raise their staff salaries, they can change the price of a Big Mac by 20 cents. We are not allowed to change our price. So with this, I'm asking that we have an allowance to have immediate per diem adjustment or a review for per diem adjustments to be able to pay staff at a better rate so we can get them in the door and serve the kids. A final thought is we're looking at this as the rates come in and we're serving fewer kids. Insurance companies are paying at a higher rate than DCS is and going to force us to do more work on the insurance side. The closed units I am currently converting over to be insurance-based beds. This is going to make the most acute kids have less opportunities for service. That's all.
Thank you. Questions? Please. And can you introduce yourself, please?
Thank you. I'm Carolyn Jackson, State Representative for the First District, which is Hammond and Whiting. Mr. Stern, I listened at your comments in your testimony. I do have one question, and it is pertaining to your workforce. Have you partnered or thought about partnering with the university to get students to work there at your facility that would kind of help to lighten the load off of your overburdened staff? Because I know many classes or many majors, you have to do an internship when it comes to different social services and things like that. Because actually I did one myself when I was in college. And I'm just wondering if you've looked into that, because that would benefit many students.
We are partnered with them on that. The internships require the same background checks and the same training that all staff go through. So many of the shorter internships, the kids from the university do not want to come because they're required to go through the full onboarding process. And that process is longer than the internship. The longer internships, we do have interns that work in different departments. We've also partnered with the athletic departments looking to find athletes to come into during their off seasons and work different things. We have connections in I won't say all the departments, but connections in most of the departments that have anything to do with child welfare, police work, criminology, education. We do have partnerships with all those departments up at Indiana State.
Okay, thank you.
Good question. Other questions?
Just a quick question.
Director.
How long are your internships?
That's based off the school. The Indiana State's internships, depending on the program, whether it's social work, some of them to the doctoral psychology, some of them are year-long, some of them are as short as 3 months.
Okay.
I mean, some of them can be based off of a number of hours that the student needs. And some of them are, 80 hours, 100 hours, 120. Some of them are like the doctoral psychology interns. They're with us for an entire year.
Okay.
And they help with testing and doing things of that sort. Those are actually paid internships.
Thank
We have
you.
unpaid and paid.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Are you also impacted by the 2-year look back the same way the other two organizations were?
Yes.
If there was more of a just-in-time sort of a readjustment for costs, would that alleviate the problem?
I can't guarantee it would alleviate the problem, but I think that in a crisis, we need to make some immediate change. Yes. If you go back and ask me 4 years ago, was it a problem? It really wasn't, because the inflation and everything was pretty steady, and it really wasn't an individual problem for our company. I don't know that it gave an accurate reading. It didn't impact us at the level it is now.
But you also had the operating margin.
No, we're non-for-profit.
Pardon?
We're a non-for-profit also.
Right, but you used to have an operating margin.
I think there was an operating margin. I don't know when it went away, but a few years back it went away.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sean McCrindle from Basher. You talked about one of the things your agency really had, I think, pride in, and we would reciprocate that, was the ability to find a way to say yes for helping kids. How have you seen that now not being able to say yes impact your staff, maybe your long-term staff, but also what do you suspect will be kind of the backlash related to DCS workers who are trying to find placements for these kids?
I'll go back to the saying yes. I developed some really good relationships with some different people in the administration level at DCS, to where when something became an issue and we had kids on couches and things of the sort, I was able to make phone calls, or they would make a phone call or a text, and we were usually able to negotiate it. And no matter what the case was, I mean, we were usually able to find a way to either be a long-term solution, or sometimes we were an overnight or 2-day solution. And those relationships developed really through that. As we are a service provider, and that's who we're providing the service to. And when you run a business, you want to be the best service provider. You want to be the first call. By not saying yes, I'm assuming whoever is saying yes will become that first call. If anybody's able to say yes, I don't know that anybody is now. So I know that I had a call the other day about someone, and the kid was living in a hotel at the moment, and I hate that situation, but the answer is, sorry, we're only currently serving 85 kids because we don't have the staff, and our 85 are full. And really, when some of them leave, we're in triple staffing in a few units. We would like to go to double staffing, so we might just drop to less kids. It's because as we run triple staffing, we're doing some staff, whether it be administrative staff working 50 and 60-hour work weeks, and there becomes a time that again, the new minimum wage is $15 an hour across the world. It's become that. So if we're going to pay $14.50, $15 an hour, unless you have a passion to work in this field, and I don't know what the actual average lifespan of the job is for a direct care worker in this field. I know I have a background in education, and special education teachers, which I am licensed in that area. I was told in grad school, why are you getting a graduate degree in this? The average career span is only a year and a half. When you're in a career span, looking at a job that doesn't have, and I go to all the facilities across the state, you don't see hundreds of people that are, I'm going to retire from direct care work here in another year or two. It is a pass-through job, and people, you can go to places that are closed, that have set hours.
Other questions, Director Stigler?
So the COVID dollars that were allocated to the state, did you request any of those last year?
Oh, yeah.
Hey,
Yeah.
I just wanted to point out, we were kind of disappointed in the response to the dollars that we had available for COVID, not in your
Yeah.
organization, but I was just asking, and didn't think of it to ask the other
Yeah,
ladies that testified.
We were involved with the state COVID dollars, federal Homeland Security money. We're also concerned about that too, though, as it's going to impact our cost reports as income now. So that's another issue that, it's federal money out there to help get you by, but now you count it as income, which is going to make our cost report look even worse again. So we almost wish we wouldn't have applied. That's one of the things we've been talking about, is if we wouldn't have applied, it would have impacted our rates in a better way. So
Kind of a catch-22.
yeah, probably just a negative is what we're looking at as our company.
Well, Director Stigdon, can you talk about why you were disappointed, or characterize that with respect to the COVID money, and then address Mr. Sturm's comment about how it will impact the cost reports going forward?
I'll let Aaron talk about the cost reports, but out of the 10.8 that we allocated as a state, we only had requests for 5 million of that. So we had 5 million that was left.
And what happened to that
That
leftover money?
goes back, right? Yeah.
So you had 10.8 million available. You had requests for 5 million, so you reverted 5.8.
Correct.
Okay.
And Aaron,
Want to talk about the impact on cost reports?
Aaron Atwell, CFO, DCS. Yeah, so the director's right. We had 10.8 million allocated from the CRF funding. 5 million was allocated out, so it left 5.8 million back to return to the budget agency for other purposes. And then on the cost reports, accurate. So the guidance is to recognize any revenue to offset the cost. So if your costs were $5 and you received the CRF revenue of $5, they basically offset the cost. So the cost that they would have reported would have bumped their rate up, but since we guided them to report the revenue as well, it basically cancels each other out.
So is Mr. Sturm's assertion correct?
To specifically to his rate, I'm not sure. It will not go up because of the cost, but to that specific rate, I don't know what that rate is.
You're saying it will have a neutral impact?
So listing the cost as well as the revenue we'll have, will cancel each other out. Now, I won't know exactly what it does to the specific rate, as there's multiple costs associated with that.
Okay. But am I hearing you say that theoretically the impact would be neutral?
Should be on those costs.
Okay.
Now, moving forward, if they were not one time, if they're ongoing cost, yeah, the rate wouldn't reflect an ongoing cost.
Okay. Well, we'll ask other presenters to get into that in their
Sure.
testimony as we go forward. And
Thanks.
again, I'm sure we'll see you again. Any other questions for Mr. Sturm? All right, thank you. Next is D. Zendrowski with SCAN. Ms. Zendrowski, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly.
You are, thank
All
you.
right.
Yes, I'm Dee Zendrowski. I'm CEO of SCAN. And I've actually been in my role for 5 years. So it's been a great 5 years. I hold an
Timing is
MBA.
everything.
Yeah, timing was great for that. Yeah. I hold an MBA and like Rachel, I'm a licensed mental health counselor in the state of Indiana. And, you know, SCAN is very different from some of the same organizations or the organizations that you heard of. We're a purely community-based provider. So we don't have an operating margin. We don't have cost center reports or anything like that. We are purely paid or reimbursed by the community-based rates by DCS in which they give us for our services, our home-based services. So I can't comment on any of that. So please don't ask me any questions. I'll refer back to them. SCAN has been providing child welfare services for over 45 years. I think we started with visitation in Allen County, and we have expanded and have grown to 38 counties in the northern part of Indiana. And so we are here because we believe in the mission of child welfare to serve children and families. But we currently are experiencing the same issues with workforce that some of my colleagues have already spoke so eloquently about. Currently this last fiscal year, and I can speak very forthright because I just ended my fiscal year on September 30th. So we just started a new one and it's not getting any better. So the statistics that I'm telling you now is already starting my next fiscal year. We've carried 15 open positions, direct line staff positions. So they're either bachelor's level positions providing home-based therapy or home-based casework, supervised visitation. And then of course we have combined therapy or therapists and bachelor's level with family preservation services and providing, I would say, family-centered treatment out of probation or on the probation end of that. Of those 15 direct line positions, they would carry a caseload anywhere from, I would say, 10 to 12 families. So we left about 360 families unserved because they stay with an average length of stay about 6 months with us, coupled with a 30% turnover rate of our bachelor's level staff. And then just our therapist shortages and in all of our locations that we're in. So we have an office in Lake County, we have an office in South Bend, we have an office in Kokomo that we're opening for prevention, and Allen County is our corporate office or home office. We have partnered with all of the educational institutions. We provide internship programs, and they're just not churning out students that really like and want to do child welfare. And then on a therapist end, I'm losing my therapist to online therapy programs so they can create their own hours, make their own money doing the things that they don't have to do, you know, going into homes. And some of our homes are not as clean as you would keep your homes. And dealing with all of those things can take a toll on their mental health. We have just conducted at the end all year long, we've done exit surveys and it is low salary for the difficult work. Our working hours are evenings and weekends and our benefits, particularly family benefits, are very costly. So SCAN is going to sustain a 53% increase in medical benefits, and SCAN pays 87% of that premium for their employee, but we pay very little for employee and children and or families. So I have one individual on family benefits. He makes a salary of $60,000 and $4,000 of that salary will go to family benefits a month. So we're working on that. We really are working with our insurance provider to help with that. We have recently raised our minimum wage. So any position inside SCAN that is a bachelor's, or I would say associate's degree and below, was averaging from $7.50 to $10 an hour. We went up to $15 an hour, just like my colleagues. Our BAs went from 15 to 17 because we've trended both in industry as well as outside of industry. And if you guys know anything about Fort Wayne, Amazon is coming and they're going to pay $19 an hour and an education. And so we have to figure out how to compete with that for that industry. So that was a total increase of $220,000 additional to my budget. And then we also went with the 4% COLA increase because everyone around us is getting a 4% COLA increase. So that of course increases my wage and salary line. SCAN is a huge fundraising organization. Some of you might know me from the duck race, and I have some really good legislative friends that are working with me on that. But we raise $1.1 million a year just to cover the gap between what we're reimbursed and the true cost of services in which we provide. This next year, of course, that 1.1 million is going to have to go to 1.3, 1.4. In my 30% turnover, I turned over 100% of my philanthropy team or fundraising team. So we're starting all over again this next year because just like direct line staff, fundraising 1.2, 1.3, 1.4 million is difficult to do. We, in terms also with COLA, we do staff referral bonuses, employee incentive programs. We've increased our PTO. We do a ton of lunch and learns with Mental Health America so that our staff can deal with their burnout, deal with depression, deal with their own life. Because just as, you know, we were all going through COVID and we were working very hard to support our children and families, they were going through COVID as well. And so they all have families at home that they needed to be supporting. And so I think that one big concern that is coming down the pike for us is this COVID-19 testing. I know it's still stuck into OSHA somewhere, but we've got to find a way to be able to ensure that our employees, because we're an organization that has more than 100 employees, either A, get the vaccination, and that's political. So, you know, you can only offer so much for someone to do that, or figure out a way to pay for the tests on a weekly basis because you don't want to transition that cost down to an employee. So if the state can help and support in any way with that, that would be amazing. And I'm also asking the state to consider supporting a COLA increase and giving us some additional dollars. We did receive a 6% increase, I think in April of 2021 with regards to our home-based services. That gave SCAN about $127,000 in revenue, which we are incredibly grateful for. But with all that I've just discussed, that has gone away. And so it really doesn't help sustain our business at all. So that's what I'm here to just ask your support for. And unlike, I don't get reimbursed 2 years in arrears, so I just get what is currently given to me. So that's all I have.
Thank you.
You're
When you
welcome.
said you're a community-based provider and have a different model than others who've testified, you don't provide residential services. Your
No, sir.
services are all non-residential. And
That's
that's the
correct.
distinction. Okay. What about your fundraising? You said there's more pressure on fundraising, but you've turned over all of your fundraising staff. How has your fundraising been impacted over the last year and a half plus? And realistically, where do you see it going? And will it be enough to cover that gap?
Yeah, I'm not sure. So my fundraising, I have to say this hasn't really been impacted. We were able to raise our 1.1 million, even turning over their staff. But I have a board member. I have a nonprofit board of 29. And so my community leaders have been very helpful and buying ducks. I mean, that's one of our biggest fundraisers. So we have 3 events and then we have, of course, major donors. And then we have just anybody that would like to give a donation to SCAN. So what I do think is going to happen is that we're going to have to figure out, I have to create positions in probably some of my regional spaces because we're providing services to the level that we're providing in Allen County. So we have both prevention and intervention contracts. So we have the full continuum of services to the Department of Child and Family Services, but we're not really gaining a whole lot of support from foundations and grants. So we've brought a grant writer on board. And then of course, our donor relations will be looking for donations in those particular areas in which we serve.
Other questions for Ms. Zandrowski?
So in Allen County, I've talked to a few public defenders that work in the area. And overall the state are commenting about a common problem, which is that when a child is deemed a child needs services, they begin receiving services that the family does up until the point there's some sort of permanency. And that the length of time between those 2 points is getting longer and longer. And as a result, families are staying in services that may not need to be in services any longer, to the exclusion of potentially the 360 you mentioned. Are you seeing that in your program? Where families probably have really said service now, but because they're still an open case, they have to continue receiving services from you?
I can say that that's probably occurring prior to family preservation services rolling out. But I think that with the implementation of family pres, we're seeing less and less of that. But there are still families still lingering in care with lack of permanency. But I think that at least in Allen County, I can speak to the fact that they've done a great job of really trying to move those families through the system. So, we've partnered very well with them to be able to do that.
In family preservation, are you one of the providers for that service as well? Okay.
We are.
So you're doing more on the front end before filing and then, okay.
Yes.
And is that part of the 10 to 12 families that you're servicing in that calculation, or is that a separate? Okay.
Yes.
Other questions? All right, thank you. Next, we have 2 people testifying together, I believe, Joanna Todd and Jess Miller from Youth Opportunity Center.
Hello, I'm Joanna Todd. I'm a residential program director at the Youth Opportunity Center.
I'm Jess Miller. I'm also a residential program director at the Youth Opportunity Center.
So the Youth Opportunity Center is a residential treatment facility in Muncie, Indiana. We once were a 110 bed facility, but due to shortages with staffing, we now only can really service about 64 kids. We, like other people have testified, have also done things to try to get more staff in the door. Before COVID hit, we employed around 500 people. We are now down to around 350. We have raised our minimum wage, like they said, to $15 an hour. We've done retention bonuses that are now $1,000 to try to onboard people. We in Muncie are fortunate to have Ball State University, and so we do have a lot of practicum students who do come in, which is great, except for with COVID, they were not allowed to come into the facility to do their practicums, and so we took a huge hit with that. They also sometimes are only there for a semester, so it's great. Much like myself when I was in college, some of us started there and have stayed there, but for them, a lot of times it's just a short-term employee. They leave at the end of the semester. So it still doesn't really help with our turnover. Through this time, we have really had to mandate our staff to be able to service our kids. So they go from working 8 hours a day to 16 hours a day. They are working, like you guys know, we're open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So some of them are working tons of hours. And so we have lost very good tenured employees to places that we can't compete with, like our community school system, who is also paying $15 an hour, but they get the summers off. And so we're losing really qualified people that just like us have a passion to work with this population of youth, and we're not able to keep up. And so we've not been able to service these kids like we would like to. We have, like many others, have had to close programs that we could service children in and are not able to any longer. Jess, what else? Yep.
All right, so I'm going to kind of switch gears. Joanna talked a lot about our staffing, but I want to talk about the kids that we're seeing. We have obviously had a decreased bed space. And so what that means is we have way fewer beds to service kids that need placement. So I'm going to just use October for example, because we just wrapped up. So we had taken a youth in our emergency shelter facility, unaware of kind of everything he was coming with at the time. Once he was placed, he had assaultive behaviors towards staff on a daily basis, multiple times a day. Within a couple of days of having him there, we realized he needed 2 staff to himself. So we were going to be able to have 8 kids total in our ES shelter because we took this one youth and we really wanted to service this youth and get him through diagnostic testing and through the assessment that he needed to decide whether he needed a QRTP. We had to figure out how to staff him. Well, we are only allowed to staff 12 staff a day right now with our current level of census. And so this kid himself pulled 2 adults to take care of him. Throughout his time in placement, the 45 days that we had him, we had to deny 10 placements of kids who needed residential or needed ES beds, either for diagnostic testing or for Maximus assessment, QRTP assessment.
And so during that time, we weren't able to service other youth, but we're seeing that in all of our units. We're having to depict between which kids to serve and which kids not to serve because we don't have enough qualified people to take care of them. And so in turn, we're getting calls about kids in hotel rooms or kids that don't have any place to go, or a kid who's failed out of their 6th foster home, and we need to figure out how to stabilize this youth. The child that we served in ES for those 45 days, we were able to stabilize him enough to get him through diagnostic testing and able to get him to be able to go an 8-hour shift without assaulting an adult or another child. And so the work that these people are doing is incredible. We work directly with the supervisors who supervise YSS staff. They've been being mandated for over 18 months, 16 hours of overtime. Joanna and I just worked shifts 2 weeks ago just to allow staff to go to an 8-hour training. In order to get our staff those things, we are pulling from other areas. People don't have quality of life, especially people in the social services field. Our staff have families and they're not often allowed to go home to them at the end of the day where they expect to. However, residential is a key part of the success of Indiana's youth. There are kids that are not appropriate today that with services and stabilization, diagnostic testing, we can find out what are the best tools and interventions for foster parents to use, but we're not going to do that by burning through foster parents first. We're going to have to get them stabilized out somewhere. And that can be places like residential, if we can provide residential facilities or any community-based services for that matter, with the funding to be able to hire qualified people and keep them. I would go to job every day. Would go to work every day at Target. I'm not going to get anything thrown at me. I'm not going to get hit. I'm not going to get feces thrown on me or urine. And I'm going to get paid the same amount I have to go to clock in and get all those things, have all those things happen to me and be expected to return to work the next day. So it's challenging work, but the support would be really incredible.
Thank you. Questions from the committee members? Representative?
Thank you, Representative. I have a question, and I've listened to your testimony as well as many of the other individuals, but I have yet to hear if you all are participating in job fairs and different things throughout your areas, as not only in the schools, but in the cities and the townships, when they put it on for the city of, for instance, my city of Hammond, they do job fairs. And some of anybody who is willing and able and would like to show up and put flyers and things together and have a representative there to discuss what they have to offer. I've not seen, for instance, any of these social service agencies at any of these fairs. And it just kind of is puzzling me. Is there a reason why?
I'll speak for our agency.
Sure.
Our HR department does go out to several job fairs. They try to keep it pretty close to Muncie due to just the job and the distance. Is someone going to drive, from, I don't know where Hammond is compared to Muncie,
Well,
but is someone
it's
going
quite
to,
a ways.
right, going to drive from Hammond to Muncie to
Sure.
work for 50. So we attend just our surrounding local, any job fairs that we can. We're much like others doing social media blasts. We, try to connect our story. Like Jess said, I could go to Target and make the same amount of money, but it's not as rewarding as working with the youth. And so we are trying to do marketing different ways that we can and being creative to draw people in and go to these job fairs and get people in and talk to people and tell our story, why I've been in the field for 15 years, why Jess has stayed. Because that's what we're hoping draws people, the right people, to want to work with our kids who are going to want to stay.
In addition to that, Joanna and I both graduated from Ball State, their undergrad and graduate program for social work. And so we both connect with Shannon State in there, who does all of our internship coordinating, but we also take IUPUI interns, IPFW. So we're also have a lot of connections that wouldn't necessarily come out in a job fair, but sending out like, hey, we're taking interns this semester. This is what we have to offer. We can take bachelor's level interns as well as master's level interns.
I understand, but there are also, and I appreciate that, that's a great idea, but there are also many other students who are graduating who may not necessarily, or attending college, who may not necessarily be in that field, who may not necessarily know exactly what social service has to offer, but they need a job.
Right.
Okay, that's all I'm saying. They need a job. They're graduating. They're either bunking on the sofa or they're sucking money out of their parents, but they would love to have a job, but they don't know. That's all I'm saying. I can't tell you how many students that I know just offhand who have just graduated in the last year, who don't have a job. They want a job, but they don't know of the jobs that are in existence because they are not advertised. They are not made of the information is not being made available to them. That's all I'm saying. They know about certain things, but if they don't come from a family that's directly related to social service type jobs and things like that, they wouldn't know. But you have many a young person who is very compassionate about helping others, but they end up driving an Uber or something like that. You understand what I mean? Where they could benefit both you as well as that individual if they knew.
Yeah.
So that's all I'm saying. So I would just like to hear or to know or to see you all do a little bit more reaching out to those younger people, even if you have to start as they're graduating from high school and say, these are the types of jobs that are out there. This is something that you could do, even if you don't do anything, but have them to come in and shadow somebody for a couple of hours. I'm sure the local school counselor would be very happy if you all would do something like that, because that's how you get those students on track to want to work in social service or in a field like that. Thank you.
I appreciate that. We have a meeting later this afternoon with our HR director actually to talk about how to get more engagement from people. So we'll take all that back.
Okay.
Thank you. Other questions? All right, thank you both. Last among the provider agencies that are testifying today is Nathan Samuel from Child Place. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Representative Claire, for your involvement with this committee, and I appreciate the committee members' time today. Let me first, before it slips my mind, Representative Ms. Jackson, our agencies are only allowed to hire folks until they're age 21, starting at 21. So that puts us in a little bit of a bind with the younger 17, 18-year-olds graduating from high school. But it also puts us behind the ball if people have been out in the workforce for a few years and then they want to move up. And if our starting rates are kind of the beginning of the spectrum too, we can't get that many folks once they're 21 to jump on board. So just want to mention that. My name is Nathan Samuel. I'm the president and CEO of Child Place in Jeffersonville, Indiana. I've been there 35 years. I won't regurgitate and completely repeat what my colleagues have said. They've been very articulate, and I appreciate that. And I might pass on that we did not connect together what we're going to say. And it's really interesting to me. I'm the last one speaking, and everything in my notes is really almost all been said. Child Place provides a number of services. We have adoption, foster care, residential treatment, community-based services, and community counseling services. We are licensed by the Department of Child Services to work with kids with developmental and intellectual disabilities, sexually maladaptive youth, teen mom and baby program, and a staff secure program for kids. This topic today, as it relates to workforce crisis, is certainly relevant. Staffing needs right now is at the top of our priorities, obviously. I would describe our staff at Child Place as being understaffed, fatigued, and very stressed. The numbers of staff that we have, the limited numbers of staff we have, does reflect a reduction in the numbers of kids that we're able to serve. It's about approximately 30% less we're able to serve now, which Child Place has 61 licensed beds. So approximately 20 of those we've had to either cap or just not be able to bring in accept any new kids. We have closed one facility that houses 10 kids strictly due to staffing. We have the beds, but we don't have the staff. And that's that's a theme I think we've heard today. I see two critical issues in dealing with the recruitment and bringing on of new staff. It's been said already that one is the background checks. We're really required to do 4, as that was mentioned earlier. Our former licensing consultant said, I think you should do one more. And so they added the inspector general for that. So we do 5 at Child Place. And the experience with that is it takes between 1 week to over 4 weeks to do that. And obviously, when people are coming to you needing a job, they can't wait more than a week to start earning a living. And so then they'll just go right down the street. And so I do have some recommendations at the end, but that's one of the critical issues. The second critical issue and is just dealing with the hourly wage we're able to pay in every other industry that I'm aware of, for the most part, whether it's food service, entertainment, manufacturing, trucking. If costs increase, they're able to pass that on basically immediately to the customer, consumer, whatever. Indiana system's different. You've heard about that already. The child service providers is paid a rate that's based on 2-year-old expenses. Then a cost of living adjustment is made. But there's really no real possibility of getting any added costs included. And you can't afford to increase your wages now and then wait 2 years to recoup those costs. It's just, you can't afford to do that. Well, at least we cannot afford to do that. There is the ability, I want to be fully transparent. There is the ability to ask for a review of your rates. But if you probably poll the agencies, the providers in this room, over the last probably 11 years, Child Place has asked for reviews almost every year. We received 2 favorable reviews. Those were years ago. And now we just get a letter back basically that says you didn't provide enough information. And so, so in reality is there's not a possibility of getting an increase once that rate is set. I understand that the legislative body has limitations on policy decisions, and it's up to the executive body to implement any changes. But also understand that the legislative body does have influence, and you can encourage strongly and raise enough concerns to help make a difference. Now for my recommendations, I have 3 recommendations. One of them, and they're all, most of them aren't new recommendations, but one is while background checks are being done, allow for the orientation and training and education of new staff. If I hire somebody today, if I choose to try to hire them based on, I think they'd be a good fit, let me go ahead and start the onboarding process. That onboarding process can be done off our campus. It can be done in a totally separate non-licensed building. It can be done, it would be done with the expectation, and if need be, an affidavit signed or an agreement signed, that new hire would not have any direct contact with any client whatsoever. All we're doing is getting in the door, starting to pay them, and getting them ready to work with our kids. If the risk on that is on Child Place, because if the background check comes back 2 weeks later, we've paid them for 2 weeks of training, but then we're going to say, no, we can't hire you. But there's no risk, from what I can see, to any clients that would be placed in our care. That alone would allow us to hire folks that are right now are walking out the door because they need a job right away. The second recommendation, it's been talked about the cost report a little bit earlier, but the recommendation I'd have is to add an option or a line on the cost report to allow for unforeseen current year adjustments. Just a line that says, what new has happened? What new expenses do you have or you anticipate having that you did not have 2 years ago? This would allow us to be competitive with our wages. I was talking again to an owner of a trucking company last night, and we were commiserating a little bit about it, difficult to hire people. And his comment to me was, yeah, I've been doing business with folks for a long time, and it's hard to go back to them and say, well, I've got to increase my costs. But he said, we had to, or we'd close the doors. And my comment was, at least you have that ability. We don't have that ability. And we do have people closing bids. And after that, it's going to be closing doors. And so then what's going to happen to Indiana's kids? They're going to go out of state. Or if you've seen recently in Fresno, California, there was a big news article there about kids are staying in the DCS offices during the day, and then they transport them to an emergency shelter at night, only to pick them up the next morning and keep them in the office in the day. And nobody wants that. Nobody, period. So allow us to put some line item on the cost report that we can say this is a legitimate cost. We can show it's being incurred already and allow that to be done. The important thing about that is our rates starting in January have not been set yet. So something could be done today, this afternoon, tomorrow, to say we're going to do this to start at minimum the start of January 1, 2022. The third recommendation I'd make deals with the reinstatement of the operating margin. We've talked about that as well. And I appreciate Director Stigdon. I think in your first year, or maybe your second year, you implemented the operating margin for not-for-profits. And I can tell you that made a significant difference. I believe that got us through 2020, the COVID, the initial thing, because we had a little bit of a margin there to be able to bear some of those front-end costs. I'm going off my notes a minute here, but in response to, did we receive Indiana's part of that $10.8 million offering for the COVID relief? Child Place did not. And the reason we did not is we were able, right there, able to make it cost-wise. And we know in 2023, they're going to take whatever money, it wipes off, as it was mentioned by Aaron, it offsets the cost. But what that does is that does not allow us to show those costs. So in 2023, it's going to say, oh, Child Place was able to serve all these kids for a lot less. And that is not true. We're going to, in 2023, it would bury us. So we chose, that was a decision we made as a company made to not do that. And that's why we did not participate with that. It's been commented about the for-profits. If somebody's doing the exact same thing as a not-for-profit, the exact same services, maybe across the street from each other, the for-profits are getting 7% more for that. And there's no equity in that. We're at a time when we're talking about we have to have equity. There's no equity in that. So I feel it's necessary that all providers need some margin to be able to operate within and to be able to make sure that they're providing, expanding, adapting the services. I just think it needs to be all providers. And the reason that for-profits get it is the legislative body put it in code. It's the law. And the reason it is not for not-for-profits is it's not in code. And so the offset for not-for-profits was the DCS director has the ability, has the discretion to say, yes, we're going to do an operating margin. And in this year, 2021, that decision was made not to do that. And I understand early on with COVID and didn't know that the amount of dollars that were going to be flowing into the state. The reason is like, well, we better hold off. We don't know where we're going to be. But things came back much better than anticipated. And the decision has still been made not to do that for this year. And that's disheartening. That's my comments. I just thank you for your time. I'll try to answer any questions, but I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Any questions? Representative Jackson.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Mr. Samuels, I just have a couple of comments to make. And if I can go back to the initial statement you made about you can only hire people who are 21 years of age. I understand that, but most college students are not 21 years of age. And they can do, and they are required to do an internship. And those internships in many instances are not paid. They are not paid by you. They would be paid by that institution in which they attend. So that would not be a expense that you would have to worry about covering, just so you'll know. The other thing is you talked about the background checks. I happen to be part of the legislation, and we had extensive talk in my committee about the background checks and things like that, and people working. At no time, as far as I know, was it ever mentioned that you all could not have a class to teach those individuals what the job is consistent of it off-site. There's nothing that I have ever heard that says you could not do it. According to my memory and what I remember it stating was that that new employee could not have any contact at all with any of the children. That was what I was under the impression. So I don't see why you would be told that you couldn't hire someone off-site and train them, and hopefully by the time their training is over, then they would be able to transition into a full-time job or part-time job, however you all chose to do that.
I appreciate, and I wish that's the way it was interpreted. That's not the way it's being put out. And we have key DCS people in here that have told us you cannot. They understand the issue, but they said we cannot do that. Am I incorrect? Because if we can do that, fantastic.
So David, do you feel comfortable speaking on this? The microphone, because it is loud.
Good morning. So David Reed, Deputy Director of Services for DCS. And I think it does state that they can't be hired until they've passed background checks. Now, during COVID, we've allowed some waivers. So when requested during these circumstances, we've allowed folks to hire folks while they're in training. I haven't asked for quite some time though, but that is still out there. We haven't canceled the ability to request waivers due to COVID.
Right.
But you said they can't be hired prior
That's
to the
the way the
background
statute
check.
reads, that you cannot be hired until they've cleared their background checks.
Right, but you're saying that that's the way the statute reads, but you can provide a waiver from the statute?
So, well, as requested during COVID, we've been able to, again, make sure they have no access to children. They're off campus when they're
Under
going
the
to district.
governor's emergency orders.
Correct.
Right, which are probably coming to an end.
That's what I'm understanding as well from recent
Right.
articles.
So that's not real. I mean, whether waivers have or haven't been requested, that's not
Correct.
going to help going forward.
Correct.
So to Mr. Samuel's point, the statute currently does not allow it, and you won't have waiver authority once the emergency order ends.
Correct.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Mr. Samuel, did you want to talk about Representative Jackson's comment or question about college students? I think I know the answer, and that is that it doesn't matter if they're unpaid interns, you still wouldn't be able to use them because they're under 21.
That's my understanding, and we do not. We have a relationship with the Kent School of Social Work in Louisville.
Sure.
And the interns we get from them are 21 years of age. They're the ones receiving their master level, and they're in the final completion. We don't hire those, or excuse me, we don't bring those on that are under that age, I don't believe. A lot of things happen within my agency that we may be doing, but I'm aware that there's an age expectation of 21 years of age.
Thank you for that clarification. Thank you so much, because there are many students who are not 21 years old who are in school, because I was one of them. And I would have had a heck of a time getting a degree, because I wasn't that old. But thank you. That is definitely something we need to revisit. Thank you.
Don't go away. Mr. Moore.
When you asked for the appeal of the rates, I'm not sure that was your indirect cost rate or your direct cost rate, and you got a letter denying that. Is there an appellate, like, is there another level of appeal?
Yes, there's a next level, which is the actual, the first one is a review, and then the second one is an appeal, I believe. And that does go before a judge.
An ALJ.
ALJ.
Yeah.
And then I think I actually have four.
If I can just respond. You know, the other thing is it's really difficult, because DCS is they're the people that refer kids to us. So it's a tenuous situation between us. And nobody really wants to be here today say anything negative about what's going on, or anything negative where it might reflect negatively on the director or for any of the key folks, because we want to work together. But and so when you do these reviews, if you're told no, you don't know how far to push, and it's really awkward. But the ability to do that is there. Yes.
When you're told insufficient information, are you given details about what was missing in your submission?
No.
Okay. And then I think I heard you're looking for parity between nonprofits and profit childcare entities. That another request you're asking?
Yes.
Okay. And then I asked a question of another provider. Public defenders on the state are consistently reporting that there's a long period between fact finding and permanency of a child, and some of these community-based organizations are providing services because they have to continue doing so while the case is open and pending. Are you seeing a large number of families just receiving services because the cases are open and you're having to not give service to other families as a result, or what's your experience down?
Are we experiencing, say that one more time?
Sure. Are a lot of families just sort of like 18 months between fact finding and permanency, where they're just receiving services, right. Nothing's new, nothing's changing for about an 18-month period? Are you seeing an increase in that, or?
No, I wouldn't say we're having that. The issue for we have a community-based program service as well, and those families just kind of work through the process and then I'd say graduate out or launch out on their own, and then it kind of starts out. We get new referrals coming in the front door, but no. I would add that the fix for the operating margin, that is a legislative fix. Right? Representative Claire said we're 2 months away or whatever from getting in.
About
so
2 months away.
Put that in there that, look at that or consider that, I would say.
Absolutely.
Yep. So was that your last question, Mr. Moore? Okay. Where was I? Okay, so I'm keeping an eye on the clock, and I want to make sure Director Stigdon has time to talk about the workforce challenges that DCS itself is experiencing. I don't believe we have anyone from the public here to comment today, so we have a little bit of time. And before you sit down, Mr. Samuel, you almost made it. I wanted to ask you and any of the other presenters who would like to get back up and touch on this to talk about the COVID dollars that were not requested. Again, I believe Director Stigdon said there was $10.8 million available. Only $5 million of that was requested, so $5.8 million reverted. And then also the fundraising issue. If you could just touch on both of those briefly, and then anyone else, starting with Ms. Fisher and all of the others, if you have any comments on either of those issues or anything else you'd like to touch on, just line up behind Mr. Samuel and we'll have lightning round here.
I've kind of mentioned it, and I'll defer to my colleagues on their idea. But again, the reason Child Place did not go after those dollars that the state put back out there were because it had been said through the Department of Child Services that if you receive these dollars, then you're going to that's going to be reflected on your cost report. And if, just for easy math, you have $1 million in expenses this year, and then you go and say, I need $200,000 from this the special fund. We still had $1 million in expenses. And in 2 years, that's what you're looked at. But on our cost report, it would have to be reflective of $800,000. And so then 2 years down the road, your rate is going to be based on a lower amount, and that would vary us. Now, Child Place did accept the PPP, Payroll Protection Program funding, and quite frankly, I'm very concerned about that because it really helped us. And it's continuing to help us because we, like everybody else in here, I heard everybody say they had to increase their costs. They had to do unbelievable creative things to try to retain the staff they have. But the only way we could do that is if we would have our money that was front loaded and we were able to use the payroll protection to help offset some payroll costs, and then the other dollars, we split out. It's very concerning.
So you're concerned about how PPP will be viewed
Absolutely.
in rate setting going forward?
Absolutely.
Okay. And fundraising, did you want to talk about that at all?
We're not really. I mean, we're fundraising. We try to offset every cost we can to fill in the gaps. And so, but we're doing it, and we're able to do that. We have generous people in Indiana.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Jackson?
So we did receive some of the COVID funds that were pass-through dollars from DCS. And one of the things that we tried to be careful on was attributing them to expenses that we really felt were attributed to the pandemic so that it wouldn't negatively affect our cost report. So masks, for instance, you know, if that's seen as something that's very 2020 and very 2021, but not going forward, you know, we felt comfortable saying, okay, we can accept funds for those specific expenses and not fear that 2 years down the road, we're going to have a lower per diem because of it. So we tried to be, you know, very deliberate in that and really just speak to what we felt were COVID specific expenses. And then, you know, fundraising, we, like many other organizations, we, you know, engage in fundraising wherever we can. And we try to use fundraising for capital projects because those are things that are not covered in the rate, you know, as opposed to trying to fundraise for programs that, again, we know are going to be offset in our rate. So does that help explain?
Yes, thank you. And Ms. Fisher, I saw you hopping up. Okay, so same idea with trying to focus the COVID dollars on COVID specific
So we did not
expenses.
apply, and part of that was looking at how would it impact cost report, but then also where will COVID go? How will we realize these costs in the future? It is still here. We still have our kids in masks every day. We still are realizing the cost. I am different. I will say I'm fortunate. I'm part of a large healthcare system. We're already doing weekly testing of our staff, the hospital being part of 17,000. All of that's rolled out for us, mandatory vaccinations, testing. So we're different, that we have a large healthcare system that supports us, whereas my colleagues don't have that. But so those make some of our decision-making on did we apply or did we not? And we just felt the impact on our cost would be too detrimental.
And Director Stignan, you made the comment earlier that you were disappointed that more agencies hadn't applied or they hadn't applied for more, if I heard you correctly, but I'm hearing them say that there were some constraints that kept them from applying or made it unattractive to apply. So can you comment on that?
I get that piece, but all of the expenses associated with COVID is what I was thinking. Testing, masks, gloves, gowns, all of the PPE, that is not cheap. And I know that the demand was high and supply was low at the beginning. Everyone was affected by that. But as it started coming in, I was really hoping to provide at least that bit of relief for our providers so that paying for PPE wasn't such a burden. And so, but maybe it didn't cost more. It just seemed really surprising that as much as we received, that wasn't used for COVID related expenses. I was not implying that it would be used for anything and everything. But I was just,
right.
We're excited about it because we wanted to provide that relief to our providers.
Okay, because what I hear everybody saying, I mean, the consistent theme is they need money for staffing. So that wasn't available for staffing.
Not COVID.
Right,
no.
right. Okay, thank you. Anybody else want to add a word before we shift over to Director Stignan? Thank you all for being here to testify again. If you would make sure that my legislative assistant, Matt LaPrette, gets a copy of your testimony, you can leave it with him or better, probably email it to him. I'd like to make that available to the committee members. And then Director Stignan, I know you have lots of pages here, but I think our focus is really on the workforce piece. And I know you have some slides related to workforce. So DCS obviously is not immune from the workforce crisis. And, you know, I'd love to hear how it's affecting DCS and how DCS is responding.
Sure. So thank you for that, Chairman Clear. Some of the things I wanted to go over with is really the demand on the agency. So what are the things that we're dealing with? Hotline reports are come down a little bit compared to take out 2020. Previous years has come down a little bit, but that's not necessarily normal, abnormal, it just is. Assessments, opening assessments is down a little bit from previous years. We tend to trend down every year, the assessments that we open. As we look at the children that we serve in DCS, we've gone down since 2018 year-to-date snapshots from 25,060 to 17,599 children served by DCS. And then children that are out of home, whether they are in foster care, residential facilities, group homes, or with relatives, that number has gone down from 15,728 to 11,119. If you look specifically at our kids in residential facilities, in the last 3 years, those numbers have gone down from 841, and these are chins only. This does not include probation youth, down to 510. And our rate of children entering care has decreased from 8.1 to 5.3. And I'm sorry, I'm skipping around. I just don't want to keep anybody here.
thank
I
you.
don't like getting into people's lunchtime. Okay, so as we look at the number of kids coming down, when I came on, to give you a frame of reference, we had about a 600-person vacancy when I came on. So as we were able to hire up, now that number is coming down, which it should as the kids in care are coming down. But like everyone else, not just the people here today, but we're facing nationally this great resignation and this really bizarre set of circumstances where employers are struggling to maintain their workforce. And like you said, DCS, the agency, is not immune. It's almost like we are all in this together, struggling, trying to find people to work. So our 12-12-13 is the in statute of the caseload requirement for DCS, 12 assessments, 12 out-of-home children, 13 in-home children. And the since, let me go through this. We've have at the end of state fiscal year 21, so at the end of June 30th, 2021, we had 1,975 field family case managers, 150 in training, and we still needed another 92 to meet 12-12-13. Last year, for the first time, the agency actually met the caseload standard on all counts. We were actually at about 104%, which is fantastic. That number is rapidly coming down. Only 9 of our 19 regions met the caseload standard, but 14 of those 19 had at least 90% of the staff needed. Statewide, we're at about 96%.
So pause there. I know you're trying to
Yes.
go quickly, but help me reconcile that fewer than half met the standard, but 3/4 roughly had 90% of the staff needed ostensibly to meet the standard.
Right, so meeting the standard, they met it at least 100%. So as we go back to see, well, how many of the regions, they're not at 100% staff, but they're not in terrible dire
Okay.
50%
So
rates.
meeting
So
the
at least
standard,
90%.
meeting the standard would be 100%.
Correct,
Okay, thank you.
no problem. So looking at our family case managers in training, you can see it, that line looks like it's fibrillating a little bit. But it dropped in 2020 because we were able to hold people, hold family case managers, and lots of rationale behind that as we look into it. But as you can see, that number is going up. And as you look at our turnover, this says it a lot right here, which I'm sure our providers have very similar graphs. Our turnover has decreased from 2018 down to 19% for the whole year of 2020. And year to date through September 30th for this year, we're already at 24%.
So it's gone back up.
It's gone back up.
Right.
Higher than it was even before.
Interrupt you real quick. I should have said this earlier. If anyone in the audience wants a copy of Director Stigdon's presentation, we're very informal. Feel free to walk up and grab one. We've got about 7 or 8 of them sitting on the table. So we've already killed the trees. You're welcome.
Might as well take them.
Seriously, you're welcome to come up and grab one. Don't be shy. Please continue.
All right, so as we're looking at our turnover for annualized, it's not a pretty picture for anyone involved. So just to kind of go over some of the finances so that people are aware, our legislative updates. So for this current biennium that we are in, out of the, our annual budget or our budget was reduced by $40 million, almost $40 million, from $925.8 million to $886.1 million. In addition, we were directed to increase provider rates for community-based services by 10 million per year and award $2 million per year to the Boys and Girls Clubs and All Pro Dads. And a grant of $250,000 for All Pro Dads. In addition, we had the foster care organization tax credits and the adoption subsidy for implementation. So changes that were made that impacted our budget. The next few slides goes over our spend, which is kind of probably maybe a little hard to see, but hopefully you can see it. It's a bar graph that breaks down our program spend for all finances, all money spent in all out of the DCS budget. So as you can see, our budget went up, our spend, that top number has gone up a little bit every year. We're about even and this is ending, these are fiscal year numbers, so not year to date. The largest chunk of our budget is directed toward, if you look at chunks, out-of-home care expenditures, and that's to foster homes, community-based services, residential care providers, et cetera. If you look at the out-of-home breakdown by type, you will see, and that's the funny little bar graph that's been broken out into what looks like stair steps. You will see that the spend has gone down a little for residential placements, but as you see, the number of kids in those facilities has gone down tremendously. And the number that tends to stand out is our out-of-home community-based services that increased dramatically from state fiscal year 2020 to 2021. And so what, data just encourage you to ask more questions. So as we looked at that, we broke that down, which goes into the next graph, which looks at out-of-home community-based spend, which shows the bulk of the spend going to supervised visitation, followed and not followed closely, but followed by therapy services and casework services, and then on down the line. So trying to figure out what's going on. So the last graph, as we look at it, is the monthly supervised visit spend versus children out of home care. So the yellow, solid yellow shows the kids in care going down. The supervised visitation spend kind of fibrillates. That dip is due to COVID. If you look, it kind of has this slow trend upward. And just a reminder of the change in the overall budget for DCS. You're trying to figure out what's going on there. As far as the profit margin, it was great to be able to say yes. I always like to try to get to yes whenever possible. And it was great to be able to say yes when we had the funding for it. And this year we did not have the funding allocated, nor did the General Assembly elect to put it in the budget bill for this biennium. So I know that was like super, super fast. Aaron, is there anything that, I would.
No, thank you. You don't think the General Assembly always gets it right, do you?
I am not going to comment on that. But I appreciate the question. Or the statement.
Back to turnover.
Yeah.
23.8% through 9/30. So clearly turnover has increased. Do you have any sense of whether that increase is likely to continue, or do you think you've hit a peak at this point?
We watch it. I would say it's still high. It's down a little bit from October was down a little bit from September, but still much higher. If you look at the last 3 years, it's much higher than any of the other months for the last 3 years. So we've looked into why.
So when we're talking about 24% turnover, we're talking about 1 out of 4 DCS workers turning over annually. You said you've talked about why.
Yeah, we look into why. So we do exit surveys.
Yeah. So why?
And talk to staff. Work-life balance is really difficult work. It's a challenge. They can go and make a little bit less and have a lot less stress. at any other place. I would say that every reason that our provider partners gave when they come up here, our folks are affected the same way. Some of our FCMs, they like working with families, so they go to the community-based services side. Not necessarily, D, I think, spoke to community-based services, so they tend to go there if they don't leave the child welfare industry entirely. They leave the state agency and go to a provider.
Where is DCS's pay and benefits now for DCS employees versus employees of the provider agencies we heard from typically? How does that stack up?
So we gave an 11% increase back in 2018, and then any other increase since then has been paid for performance. So nothing directly, no across the board increases from the agency. The case managers they start out at a little under $20 an hour. And that's where, everyone starts out there.
Somebody from one of the agencies, how does the pay compare with DCS in your local area? Here he comes.
Nathan Samuel,
Stepping
Child
up.
Place. We are just under DCS. We do lose staff to DCS. Probably our starting would be about 17 an hour for the case manager, going up to close to 20.
So
That's for us.
so in addition to all the other competition, you're also competing with DCS itself.
Yeah. It's still helping kids. So
Sure.
But all right.
It's kind of we're all in the same bowl. They can just kind of rotate. It's like this door. So there's folks that leave DCS, go to providers, there's providers that come and work at DCS. I think those are people that really want to work with children.
If they leave DCS and go to a provider or vice versa, do they have to have a new background check?
I would think so. Yeah.
I'm kidding, but I'm serious.
Well, you're
I think it
The answer
kind
is
of,
yes.
yeah, I mean, it kind of underscores one of the issues that's been talked about today, right? Okay, well, thank you for going
Sure.
quickly through that. Other questions for Director Stigdon? Mr. Moore?
So in terms of the cost that the providers discussed when they, if they were to accept the COVID dollars, offsetting that to your forward look, in terms of reevaluating, has DCS considered asking the feds for a waiver of that part of it in determining cost to not count any funds that were received through the COVID?
Not that I know
dollars?
of, no.
Is that something that, I mean, we saw waivers for implementation of FPSA and other things. Could that be something that DCS could request for the benefit of the providers, or?
I haven't heard of that. We can always ask.
Okay.
Doesn't mean the answer is yes. But you know that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Sure, no problem.
You mean we can always ask the federal
Feds,
government
mhm.
whether that's an option?
Right.
Or I assume other states have asked the question, right?
I think, so, yeah, I would assume this is not a first time problem in this realm. So I imagine there is a process for asking for waiver for those dips and valleys that occur during situations like COVID.
Yeah, the COVID funding.
So your question is whether a waiver exists, right?
Or is there or is there a plan to consider asking for a waiver?
Right, but first question is whether there is the possibility of applying for a waiver.
Yeah.
And then the second question, of course, would be, would we do that?
I hadn't
Would we
heard that a
consider
waiver
that?
exists.
Okay. That's probably a better question. Would DCS, would the state consider that option?
I haven't heard that a waiver exists.
Oh, okay.
Being in meetings with other child welfare leaders, but I mean, if a waiver exists, we would of course ask for it. But yeah,
Well, how do we find out whether a waiver exists?
we'd have to ask our federal folks
Okay,
at Administration of Children and Families.
okay. Will you do that, please?
I will do that.
Great, thank
How
you.
did I walk out of here with homework?
We probably have more homework after the next two meetings, so
Oh.
this is a light day.
Fair enough.
Mr. McCrindle, did you have a question?
Actually, a bit of a comment, having been on this committee since its inception, a large focus of this has been gaining and maintaining DCS staff at the adequate level. Obviously, the Great Resignation has an impact to that. But one of the concerns I have is if some of these things aren't addressed, and there isn't a way for providers to be able to fund things adequately and bring the staff in, there's a backlash on DCS with that. Obviously, there's kids sleeping in offices with staff, and that pressure is likely to do nothing but increase the speed at which your staff decide they cannot do this work. And there are many DCS staff who are in this room and who have spoken, who are at a very high quality level. I know as a provider myself, I have great concern that if there's a turnover in some of those levels, there will be a loss of knowledge that's very hard to recoup. And so I guess just in the comment of that, this stuff becomes very important, not only for providers, but for ensuring that we don't backslide in a way that we could have prevented with our DCS staffing. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Is it okay if just real quick?
Please.
I wish I had all the answers to this, and I know that I'm not alone. I know all of you wish you had the answers to it. This is a challenge for everyone. I mean, we lose people at all levels. I just gave you the family case manager turnover. I didn't give you the rest of the agency. This is a challenging time for all of us as a nation, period. And I don't know what the answer is. We're looking at anything that we can do that may not necessarily take money because we don't have the give currently in our budget, which is why we're doing a lot of improvement work around that. But I wish I could fix it.
I didn't understand. I'm glad you said that because I didn't understand on the employee turnover slide that was just the FCM turnover.
Oh,
So you're
sorry.
saying
Yeah,
that
that's FC.
the
That is total.
23.8% is FCM turnover.
I apologize. Yes,
That's
that's
okay.
total agency.
Do you know off the top? This is total agency.
Yes,
The 23.8%.
Yeah.
Okay. So what's the FCM turnover?
I'd have to pull that.
Okay. Do you think it's higher or lower?
They drive the turnover, so it's probably a little bit lower.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? All right. Thank you for that. We are a little over time. I think Mr. Moore was the alternative permanency options item yours on the agenda. Do you mind if we hold that for the next meeting? Okay. We'll hold that for the meeting on the 22nd. As I said, we did not have any members of the public sign in to comment today, but we will try to offer that again at one or both of the upcoming meetings. I think, I've learned a lot today. I'm sure other members of the committee have. I think we have some questions that DCS is going to need to look into. We have a number of specific suggestions and requests, and I think we're going to have to take inventory of those and look at which items are under DCS's discretion and which items would require legislative action, and then have those conversations. With that in mind, anyone on the committee or anyone in the public who has thoughts on what's been discussed today, please direct them my way. We can talk between now and the next committee meeting if we need to individually. We can put together a small group discussion. If we have a committee member or multiple committee members who would like to talk further with any of the folks who testified today or any of the members of the DCS team, I'm sure we can facilitate that. So I want to thank everyone who came from all around the state today for taking the time to be here. The information was very helpful. And again, I know we have a lot to think about and a lot to discuss and probably a lot to act on. Are there other comments or discussion from the committee members? Judge Kenworthy, you have been very silent today.
I've taken a lot of notes and I've been listening very intently. And from the court's perspective, I get to see the faces that go along with the stories. And I can tell you that being on the front line along with you folks, and you're there 24/7, I'm not. It has felt like running a marathon at the pace of a sprint for a year and a half. And so I just want to say I very much appreciate the stamina of every one of you in this room today, because I know that you're there and you're working so hard under really terrible circumstances. The other perspective that I have is to view not only the story on the front end, but also the policy level view. And what I'm seeing or hearing today is that we have caregivers who are not being cared for. And so we're creating what we're trying to prevent in the family, which is very ironic. We're trying to avoid abuse and neglect in the home. And we're setting these kids up in a system where their basic needs are not being met. If they're sitting in a DCS office without education, without shelter, going on a bus, back and forth between shelter care, we can't continue down that path. And so I appreciate each one of you that brought solution ideas to the table today. These are things I was taking notes on because I'm not familiar with the cost reporting and all of that, but it's things that I want to learn more about because we can't create a system that neglects children we're trying to help.
Thank you for those comments, Judge. And I think we all, if there's one thing that I heard, and I hope everyone heard today, it's the urgency of some of these issues. So again, thanks to everyone for all the time that you gave us this morning. In addition to the agenda item that we're holding on alternative permanency options, we have a number of other issues that we're going to get into at the upcoming meetings, including the rate setting process specifically. I know there is a lot going on within DCS on that, and we want to hear about that and find out what's going on and talk about where we're heading. The Family First implementation, we've had a presentation on that before, and it's time to dig into that and figure out where we are, what's working, what's not working. I'm hearing a lot about that, and I see heads nodding all around the room. So I know there's a lot of interest in that topic as well. And we have several other topics that we've talked about. Again, I want to thank Ms. Whitman and Mr. LaPrette and Mr. Williams, who is with us now. I see him back there. Without any one of the three of them, there would have been no meeting. So thank you to all three of you. And unless there are any other comments or discussion, we will adjourn the meeting at 12:14. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm very glad.
Yeah, but it's always been on video.
I'm glad to find out.
Yeah.
I got my message. I was 20 years old. That's so unfair. And that needs to be changed. That needs to be changed. I'm glad to know that because I'm thinking that you all would be able to do a lot more that you cannot do. And that's like the system set up to fail.